Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Pete Larange, as most of you know. I'm the Historic Preservation Planner and the Certified Local Government Coordinator with the Idaho State Historic Preservation Office. And what we're going to do today is kind of go through the Certified Local Government Grant Program for the upcoming year, FY19. We'll talk about a number of different things, including the types of projects that we can fund, how to go through the application process, and then cover some of the stuff that you as CLG should be doing once you've been awarded funds but before your projects actually start. If you have any questions along the way, please feel free to use the chat dialog box on the GoToMeeting. I'll also pause at the end of each section and folks can unmute their phones at that point and ask any question that they might have. We are recording this and we will be posting it up on the SHPO's website sometime soon, so that if you need to come back and reference something that we've covered in the webinar today, it will be accessible later. All right? Okay, so the Certified Local Government Program is intended to help provide assistance to certified local governments as they're completing their work in historic preservation efforts. The primary way we do that is through the grant program. This is a 50-50 matching reimbursable grant. Your match can be cash or in kind, and staff and commission time can count towards that in kind match. We'll go into what the in-kind match is in a little more detail later. But if you're thinking about applying for grant funds and you've got questions, or you need help kind of defining your project or what you want to do, please feel free to give our office a call. That's part of our job, is to help you through that process. One of the questions we get frequently is this tax money? The answer is no. The money that we get that gets passed on to the certified local governments comes from the Historic Preservation Fund, which is all offshore oil lease money, not taxes. This is a yearly appropriation that's passed by Congress, and it's a grant program set up specifically to provide funding to SHPOs. And by law, we are required to pass on a minimum of 10% of the money that we get to the CLGs. Now, since this is technically federal money, all of the projects that SHPO and the CLGs do must conform to the HPF Grants Manual, which is approximately 400 pages. So if there are instances where we come back and say, no, you've got to do things this way because the grant manual tells us you have to, it really does tell you you have to do it that way. It's not us trying to make your lives hard. So what kind of things can be funded? A lot of this will be recap for folks who have worked with the CLG program for a while, but I know we've got some new folks, some new CLG that came online just recently, and maybe some folks who haven't worked with the grant program before, so I'm still going to go through this briefly. One of the things that we really like to try and fund is surveys. This can be, thematic surveys like post-war ranch homes. It can be a geographic survey like a particular neighborhood or district. We also can do some archaeological surveys. I know a number of our CLGs have done that in the past, and that is an option, but there are some additional requirements on archaeological surveys, so please make sure you talk to me before submitting an application for that. One of the other things we really like to fund is National Register nominations. Ideally, you've done some survey work and now you apply to us for funds to actually produce the National Register nominations. This is to hire a consultant to come in and actually do all of the work for it. We can also fund preservation planning efforts. Many of you who know me know that I've got a background as a historic preservation planner, and I like plans. So you can use our money to help develop a local historic preservation plan for your community that can really help you identify and focus your work as a preservation commission. It's also really helpful when you're going to apply for grants, because you can point to your plan and say, see, we've thought this through, we've been preparing for it, now give us the money. We can also help fund training and workshops. These can be training for city or county staff, commission members. It can also be training or workshops for members of the public. So if your community has a number of issues with, say, people wanting to restore wood windows but not knowing how, you could use the CLG grant money to bring in someone to actually do a workshop for members of the public to teach them how to do that work. So this is a great chance to not just educate yourselves as commissioners and city and county staff, but make sure that education is getting passed on to the public. We can also help fund things like design guidelines and context reports. These are great planning documents. Even if your community does not do design review, and most of our CLGs do not do design review. This can still be a useful tool for your community in that you can use it when working with members of the public to help them restore their historic buildings in an appropriate way. We can also help fund a number of other educational materials, things like walking tour or driving tour brochures. That's a very common one. We can also do some funding for acquisition and development. This is actually purchasing a historic property or doing the bricks and mortar work on a building. Both of these require some additional paperwork and documentation prior to the grant starting and as the grant proceeds. And these actually will require a preservation agreement from the property owner that goes for a period of years depending on how much money we are injecting into the project. So if you are thinking about one of these, I don't want to discourage you because these are good projects, but please make sure you're calling me first so we can go through all of the details that go into it. Let's see, I got a question here from Jackie about helping with lead paint on historic buildings. Yes, that is something that we can talk about. Typically, painting just on its own is not going to be a big enough project for us to be able to fund. We are not allowed to fund routine maintenance, and painting tends to fall into that. But if it's part of a larger project, yes, that's something we can talk about. Okay, things that we cannot fund. Come on, next slide, thank you. Things that are not related to the National Register of Historic Places or things related to in our listed buildings that have been demolished. This is a question we get often about, can we include, this important building that's been demolished in our, tour brochure? It's like, well, not really. So make sure anything that you're doing comes back to the National Register and comes back to buildings that are listed and still exist. Development projects for active religious properties. This is another question that we get on a regular basis. We've got a historic church in our neighborhood and it needs work on the stained glass. Can you pay for that? Unfortunately, the direction that we've been given from the National Park Service is to ensure separation of church and state. No, we cannot fund bricks and mortar projects for active religious properties. If it is a former religious property, a church that is no longer operating as a church but is, now a community center or something like that, then we can help fund bricks and mortar projects. We can fund planning documents for active religious properties. So if you've got a church that is operating as a church and it needs some, you need an engineer to come in and do something or an architect to draw plans, that we can fund, we just can't fund the bricks and mortar piece. We can't fund anything related to fundraising efforts, signage. This is another common question. Unfortunately, we cannot fund signage at this time. Any projects that are strictly scholarly or archiving projects, and that includes things like digitizing of records. So, you've got a bunch of photos that you want scanned in. Unfortunately, we cannot fund that. If you have projects like that that you'd like to do, give me a call and I can point you to some other resources. And we also can't fund most things related to cemeteries. So cemetery restoration is something that we cannot fund at all. All right, so we'll pause there real quick. Does anyone have any other questions? You can come off mute and ask, or ask in the chat box. Yep. If lead remediation was a necessary step as part of that larger project, yes, we can talk about, you and I can go into the details of the specific project, but if that's a piece of a larger restoration, yes, that can qualify. The project would have to be for the roof, and lead remediation would have to be a necessary component of the roof project. That distinction makes sense? Okay, great. All right, so now let's go on and talk about the actual grant application process. This is how you actually get the money. As you know, we released the call for applications on October 1st. Hopefully everyone got that. If you haven't, please shoot me an email and I'll send you a copy of the application packet and the call for applications. We include, as part of that call for applications, our funding priorities for this fiscal year. These are the things that we would really like the CLGs to focus on. You do not have to do projects in these areas. These are not requirements. These are just areas that we feel are particularly important for this fiscal year, and we would encourage our CLGs to focus on. So for FY19, our funding priorities are going to include projects that highlight women's history and women's contribution to the state as part of the upcoming 2020 centennial celebration of the passage of the 19th Amendment, which of course enshrined women's right to vote. Always we prioritize funding for surveys and nominations. This year we're also prioritizing public education with a focus on things that go beyond just the walking tour brochures. So think creatively about what kind of public education efforts you might like to do that are more than just the tour brochure. And finally, commission and staff training and capacity building. So those are the 4 priorities that we've got for FY19. Like I said, if you've got other projects in mind, that's great. Go ahead and submit for them. Just keep these in mind as you're planning out your projects. All right, we're going to go through the application real quick. This first section, the applicant, local government, this is specifically the CLG, the government. So it is not ex-community preservation commission. It is ex-community. So you want to make sure that it's, it says the city of Boise and gives the address, a telephone number that we can use, and you'll notice there's a line there for the DUNS number, D-U-N-S. This is a particular identification number used for municipal governments, both city and county. We are now asking for that as part of your application, so we've just got it from the get-go. If you need to get that number, please get in contact with your city or county clerk or treasurer. They should be able to give you that number real easily. The second section is the city or county staff contact. We would like to have a contact within the city or county government that we can get in touch with and keep involved in the project as this goes forward. This could be a staff person that works with the commission. It could be someone in the clerk's office. Have a question here. Our building has a DUNS number. Can we use that, or does it have to be the county? In this case, it must be the county, because the county is the certified local government. The county is the one applying for the funds, and it's their bank accounts that we're going to have to work with. So make sure that it's the county's DUNS number. But that's a very good question. Sorry, back to the city or county staff contact. Yeah, we just want someone who is part of the government that we can keep involved in the grant as it moves forward. The next is the grant coordinator. This is if there is someone other than that city or county staff contact who is actually managing the grant at the commission level. So this could be the commission chair, or it could be a commission member, whoever it is that's going to be doing the day-to-day organizing and coordinating of the grant at the local level. Next is the budget summary. This is you put in the total CLG grant request, all of the money that you're asking for from us, the total amount of your match that you're putting in, the cost of all projects, so that would be the money that you're asking for from us, your match, and any other match that is coming in, or donations, that sort of thing that you have planned, and then the sources of match. So this is just a real brief description of, match will be all in kind from commission members, or, city staff time, donations, cash match. Very brief 1 or 2 word descriptions. It doesn't have to go into a whole lot of detail. And finally, the authorization. This is a statement from the, let's see, had a question, is this just an estimate? Does it have to be accurate? It does not have to be accurate down to the penny, because we know that this is just kind of best guess. You don't necessarily have all of the details hammered out just yet. But it does have to be a reasonable estimate for the project. If you're proposing, or if you're asking for $10,000 to survey, 2 buildings, that's not really an appropriate amount. So just kind of be thinking about your best guess. No, it does not have to be exact, though. The authorization is the chief elected official for the CLG. So that would be the city mayor, or it could be one of the members of the county commissioners. Since the money initially comes out of the city or county budget, we want to make sure that they're signing off on the project. Okay. I had a question, if our HPC is joined with our Arts Commission, would they lose their CLG status? As long as they, as a commission, are still carrying out all of the requirements of the Certified Local Government Program, they can still be a CLG. We don't really care what you call your commission. It just needs to be doing the work of a certified local government. Another question, can the city manager sign the authorization? Yes, city managers are okay to, that's someone who is in charge of running the city. So if they're saying, yes, we're good with it, then our office is good with the application. Okay, this is the cover sheet. You will only need to do one of these. Regardless of how many grant projects you're actually applying for, you just need one cover sheet, and that'll include all of your money, all of the total grant request, all of that. Then we move on to the actual Part A. So you will do one of these for each project that you're proposing. If you've got 3 projects, you're going to fill out 3 Part A's. Up at the top, the project title is a brief description of, what you're doing. National Register nomination for X building, or roof repair on X building. And then the applicant, again, is the certified local government, so it'll be city of or county of. Let's see, the project description. This is the narrative where you tell us what you're going to be working on. Go into some pretty good detail about what you're thinking, kind of what you're hoping to get out of the project, and make sure that you include how this project supports any local and the state historic preservation plan goals and objectives. We need to tie back everything we do to our state plan. So this helps us make sure that we're meeting that requirement. The final products, this is what's going to come out of the project. So we're going to print 300 copies of the driving tour brochure, and we're going to distribute them at these areas. So that's pretty easy, pretty straightforward. If your project is for commission or city or staff training, the final product will be something similar to attendees of the conference will come back and present what they've learned to the commission at their next meeting. Copies of the minutes shall be provided to SHPO to demonstrate that happened. So that's that piece. And again, if you've got questions as you're working on these applications, please feel free to give me a call anytime. All right, this is page 2 of Part A, the timetable. Kind of lay out the milestones and timeline that you're thinking for your project. Any key staff or personnel that are going to go into it. For many projects, that may include hiring of a consultant. You do not have to have your consultant identified before you submit your grant application. Just say that you will hire a consultant who meets the Secretary of Interior professional qualification standards in the appropriate field, and that's sufficient for the application process. The last thing on Part A is the attachments. This is specifically for things like surveys, acquisition and development, and reprinting of existing publications. For surveys, we want to see a map of the area that you're looking at surveying, because it will help us determine whether your budget is a reasonable amount or whether it needs adjusting. Acquisition and development, again, please call me first because there are additional forms that have to be filled out for those, and I'd rather you contact me first so we can make sure you've got that all set when you submit your application. For reprinting, if you're going to be reprinting a publication, we'd like to see it before we fund the reprinting, so make sure you include a copy. For all of these, digital is fine. I do not have any problem accepting digital documents for the application process. All right, Part B is the budget. Again, you'll fill out the applicant is city of or blank county. The project is for that specific project. Again, you will do a separate Part B for each project that you're proposing. And make sure you're breaking out your budget items in the budget sheet. So if you're doing a design review, design guidelines for your community, you may have one item that is consultant fees, one item that is printing costs, one item that is professional editing or whatever it may be. Make sure you're breaking each of those out to the best of your ability. Again, this is an application. We want to have a good idea of what you're doing, but you don't have to have the dollar amounts exactly right. We will help you fine-tune that as we go forward. Make sure that you are putting down the amount that you are asking from us in the federal share column, and then under the local match, break out whether it's cash, which could be cash, or it could be donations from community members or whatever, and then the in-kind, which would be the staff or commission member time. One thing that has come up recently that I want to make sure folks are aware of is the federal regulations do allow a 25% project administration component. So if you have someone who is working on the grant who is getting paid to do that, so this will typically be city or county staff. If they are getting paid to work on the project, you can request grant money cover a portion of their salary. That amount can be up to 25% of your total project cost. So, you know, if you've got a, let's say a $4,000 project, and you've got someone who is going to be working going to be working and getting paid to do it, you can include an extra $1,000. That's technically 20%, not 25%, but you get the idea. So you can include that, and that can go under the federal share. If you're going to do that, please make sure you talk to me first, because there's some documentation we need to support that when we get to closeout. But that is something that you can do. And just a reminder, you will submit a Part A and a Part B for each proposed project. All right, eligible and ineligible grant costs. Eligible costs are things like the consulting fees, printing costs, any project-related travel expenses. So if you're traveling to, say, go to a conference or something like that, we can help pay for that. Things like just driving back and forth to the meetings, unfortunately, that we cannot cover. You can use that as match, but we can't pay you for it. Training, registration fees, the capacity building, so some of the planning and possibly technology things that might be useful, we can help pay for that. Public notices or advertising for things like tours or workshops, special events, that we can help cover. And as I said, some program administration, that's that 25% admin cost. Things that we cannot fund. Items not related to the National Register, we've talked about that. The strictly scholarly or archival research, funding for development on active religious properties, signs, digitizing records. Entertainment, this one trips folks up on occasion. We all know if you're holding a public meeting or a workshop, you're more likely to get more people there if you feed them. Unfortunately, the federal regs classify that as entertainment. So refreshments are considered entertainment costs, and we cannot cover that. And then archaeological excavation, which is different from survey. If a shovel's going in the ground, we cannot pay for it. I had a question from Jackie. Will you forward the slides to us? I certainly can. And like I said, I'll be posting a video of this webinar on the website in the coming days, so you can always come back and reference it. All right. Other things that we cannot cover. Any required mitigation projects, that doesn't come up very often. Major reconstruction. So again, if you're looking at a development or a bricks and mortar project, make sure you call me first, so we're not getting into major reconstruction, which is at the high end, or routine maintenance, which is on the low end. Landscaping we cannot pay for. Desks, office equipment, capital expenditures, all that pretty straightforward. And anything before or after the grant period. This is another question we get on a regular basis. What is the grant period? Is it from when we sign the contract? No, we actually allow for the full federal fiscal year grant period. So it'll be from October 1st. You can start tracking your in-kind match from October 1st of 2018 all the way through to the end of the project, the day you submit your closeout paperwork. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that we were going to talk a little bit about the rates and that sort of thing for the in-kind contribution. Volunteer time, which is commission member time working on commission business, doesn't have to be related to the project, just as long as it is commission business, so all of your commission meetings, all of that. That we track at a rate of $20.97 an hour. That is set by the state legislature. There is also a professional hourly rate, so that would be the city staff time. You can track that at your professional rate. Or if you have a commission member that is doing work for the project in their professional capacity. So this would be, for example, an architect, a licensed architect drawing plans for the project. That time they spend drawing the plans, they are serving as an architect, not as a commission member. So they can track that, they can donate that time at their hourly rate. If that architect is not drawing plans, if they're just attending the commission meetings, then you have to track those hours at the volunteer rate. I know it's a little confusing, but that's kind of the way we have to do it. Travel rates for FY19, we are allowed to reimburse lodging at the GSA rate, which is typically $94 a night, but there are a few areas like Kootenai County and then the Sun Valley area that actually have higher rates during the summer because it's tourist season. So make sure you're checking that. Per diems are set by state policy at $45 a day, prorated based on when you leave or arrive. So again, talk to me if you've got questions on that. One thing on that, tips come out of your per diem, but travel and lodging do not. So if you take a taxi ride, the base fare, whatever you pay for the taxi ride, you can include in your travel costs. But any tip you give the driver on top of that has to come out of your per diem. And finally, mileage is at 53.5 cents a mile. For a long time it was 54 cents, but starting as of January 2017, the state rolled that back to 53.5. So if you are either asking for reimbursement on mileage or tracking mileage as match, you use the 53.5 cents a mile. Distance, just document that with a Google map or something like that. Okay, when it comes to the grant distribution, it is a competitive review process. We look at 4 basic areas: the project scope, which is 40 points. That's really page 1 of your part A. And that's where we look at how it relates to the state and local plans, level of need, what are the deliverables. Administration is 20 points. That's the page 2 of your part A. Reasonableness of timelines, sufficient personnel, that sort of thing. The budget is 20 points. That is your part B. So make sure that you're meeting or exceeding your grant your match requirements, and making sure that your budget is reasonable. And then other considerations is 20 points. This is, we're looking at what is the status of any active or outstanding CLG grants. If you have an active or one that is still going, that does not disqualify you from applying for grant funds this year. We just like to prioritize money to the folks who didn't get money last year. We look at, as a CLG, are you in good standing, your past grant performance, and if there's any community support that you can add to your grant project. Again, it's not required that you have community support, but it's a nice bonus to include as part of your application. Now, all of this is available in the Certified Local Government Grant Manual. There is the URL for that. If you need that later, you can email me and I'll send you a direct link to it. Okay, So pause here for any questions related to the actual applying for grants. If anyone's got any questions, type them in or take your phone off mute and ask. Okay, sounds like there aren't any right now. If you think of any later, please give me a call. All right, so now we're going to talk a little bit about the grant contracts. Once you've been awarded funds, we will go through the grant contract process to make sure that we can legally give you the money. Contracts are typically sent out via email in March, and they must be signed by the chief elected official. Okay, I did have a question come in. Should we send you a draft to review of the application? You do not have to. If you would like to, I am perfectly happy to look at it and provide comment back on your application. You have until December 31st at end of business to get it in. So by all means, yes, send me a draft of your application and I'll take a look at it and provide feedback. But no, it is not a requirement. So the contract does have to be signed by the chief elected official or city manager, that's fine too. And you need to have 2 hard copies with original signatures. So you'll print off the contract twice, have the chief elected official sign both of them, and then you will mail them back to me. Once we execute the contracts on our end, our executive director will sign them, and 1 copy with 2 original signatures will stay with us, and 1 copy with 2 original signatures will be sent back to you. So we will each have a copy with original signatures. Sounds like a lot of work and effort, but it's one of those legal things that essentially our lawyers have said we should do. So we do it that way. Let's see. Typically, we will execute the contracts once we have received word of our notice of funding from the Park Service, which is why it's often not until May, June, July that we can execute them, because it takes that long for the Park Service to get word from Congress that they can release the funds and for them to notify us. So, and I know it's a pain for everyone to wait that long, but that's just kind of the way it has to be. Question here: will you include multiple signature lines for elected officials, i.e. 3 county commissioners? We do not need all 3 to sign. As long as one of them signs, that's good for us. Okay, so some specific sections to look at when it comes to your contract. Make sure you're looking at section 1, that's the application, the projects, and the budget that are being approved and awarded grant funds. Section 2 is the period of performance. Section 3 relates specifically to publications. So you'll see an initial draft of publications are due January 31st. A final draft is due May 31st, and we are requiring that all drafts be submitted in Word format, no PDFs. That's so that we can go back and use the track changes to provide comment and feedback more effectively. And then section 13 is special conditions. Make sure you look at that. Your projects may have special conditions attached to them, so you want to make sure you're meeting all of those requirements as you go through. And then there will be attachments which include the Part A's and Part B's for your approved projects, and any other documents that we need to attach to your contract. Okay, any other questions on contracts? Sounds like no, so okay. Wanted to talk with you a little bit about RFPs and hiring consultants. We want to make sure that you're getting the best consultant possible for your project. There are some federal requirements when it comes to procurement. So we do have to make sure that we're meeting these requirements since it is federal money. Anything that is under $3,500 or $2,000 for construction projects. So that includes the bricks and mortar projects. If it's under that $3,500 or the $2,000 for the bricks and mortar projects, it's considered a micro purchase, and you do not need to get any kind of bid. You can just pick someone and go. Small purchases, which are the majority of our grants, which are between $3,500 and $150,000, you have to get informal quotes from, quote, an adequate number of bidders. Of course, they don't define what an adequate number is, but the general rule is 3 or 4 people, and it's informal. It can be, sending an email and saying, hey, we're looking at this project, this is kind of our budget range, does this seem reasonable? You do not have to go with the lowest bidder, but you should be going with the one that is going to give you the best product for the price. There's also a category that is competitive proposals, which is $150,000 or over. We don't have that much money to give, so it doesn't matter for our purposes. When it comes to sole source, you can sole source a consultant if they are the only ones who do that and no one else does. So make sure that you're able to document that if you're going to sole source a bid. And make sure that you are meeting any city or county procurement requirements, because sometimes they have additional ones that have to go in place. These are the minimums you have to meet. Make sure that if there are any additional ones at your local level, that you're taking care of those. When it comes to writing your RFP, you should make sure that you're defining your needs clearly, but be succinct. Don't use 10 words when 4 will do, and don't use any yes or no questions. Instead of saying, do you have experience doing blank, ask, provide examples of your past work showing your experience doing blank. It just means that you're asking them to actually provide information opposed to just checking a box. Make sure that you're using good formatting so that it's readable, and think about what are your needs and what are your wants. What are those things that are absolutely necessary, and what things would be nice to include as part of the project. And make sure you're not making it so specific that only one firm can meet the requirement. You don't want to say, for example, we are looking to hire a consultant based in this city with this number of people, this many men, this many women, whose name has, the word brick in the company name. That's getting real specific, and that kind of defeats the purpose of doing a request for proposal. So make sure it's broad enough that anyone who's qualified can apply for or submit a proposal. I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. If you have more questions about writing an RFP, please give me a call later and we can go into it in more detail, because there are a lot of pieces here, and I don't want to take up everyone's morning. I can spend another hour talking about RFPs, and quite frankly, no one wants to hear me do that. So when you're writing your RFP, some sections to think about are an introduction. Who are you, and briefly describe the project. What are the basic components of the project, and what are your goals for the project. It's good to have a section on background, which is kind of the, what things do the consultants need to know about your community, and this is where you should talk about where the funding is coming from, because sometimes they need to know that. Project scope, this is a more detailed description and should include a detailed bullet list of the work to be done for the project. So this is the whole project, not just what the consultant is going to do. The consultant services should be those specific items and deliverables you want the consultant to do, and this will become the basis for your scope of work with them. Who will they be expected to work with, and what things will the HPC be doing on the project? So this helps the consultants determine what they're doing and what the commission is doing. When it comes to the budget, make sure it's fairly detailed in your RFP. If there are different components that you've budgeted for example, printing costs, make sure you spell those out, because sometimes, you know, the total project cost may be $10,000, but 3 of it is for printing. Well, that tells the consultant that they're really working with 7,000. How will the consultant's fee be structured? Hourly, lump sum, or by task? Those are all fine. Just make sure it's spelled out in your contract, in your RFP, and then in your contract with them. Include sources of match for specific parts of the project. So again, make sure you're breaking out what things the commission is doing as volunteers, and you know what sort of cash is being infused to the project. And detail how your in-kind is made up. Is that going to be commission meetings? Is that going to be project-specific tasks? That sort of thing. Again, that helps the consultant determine how much work they're doing and how much work on the project the commission is doing. Make sure to include a project schedule in your RFP, and include all the major all the major steps and milestones. So the release, the deadline for submission, if you're going to be doing interviews, when are those going to happen? When do you expect to select the consultant? What's your time frame for negotiating a scope of contract with them? When do you expect the project to start? Do you have 50 and 75% marks you'd like them to be aware of? When do you expect things to be completed? What kind of time frame are you looking at for revisions, and then final project completion and closeout? Again, this just helps the consultant budget not just their money, you know, how much they're going to be bidding for the project, but also how to budget their time on the project. Make sure you include information on how they submit their proposals. What items do they have to submit? Do you want them to submit examples of past work, references, resumes? How and where do they submit it? Do they send it as hard copy to the city clerk, or is it just a digital copy to the commission chair? And what date and time are they due? And then give them a little bit of information about how you're going to review the project, or the proposals. You know, who's going to be doing it? How are you going to score them? Are you going to be doing interviews? And make sure you're in compliance with any local requirements on these. So if your city says, our procurement process says that the RFPs have to be received and opened by, you know, the Board of Contract and Supply, you better make sure that that's happening. Also make sure that you include any contact information if they have any questions, and any other information that might be helpful as they're planning their proposal. You know, are there maps or pictures you want to include, information on previous surveys or reports, or any specific forms that they have to you know, do as part of it. And usually when you're putting out an RFP like this, having a page that say links to those documents is just fine. You don't necessarily have to attach them, just make sure there's a link for them to find them. When it comes to listing your RFP, actually putting it out there, there are a number of places where you can do that for free. Many cities or counties also post them on their local website. So make sure you're looking at these. The two that I would suggest you definitely do are the American Planning Association and PreserveNet. Those are kind of the big ones for preservation related jobs. And typically a 30-day period from release to due date for proposals is standard. You can go longer, but I would recommend that you not go any shorter. Giving consultants, you know, a 2-week period to submit a proposal is a pretty tight time frame for them to meet. 30 days is usually a good amount of time. Theoretically, you will have heard from us, you know, in mid-February, and you've got your contract in March, so you've got March, April, May to be working on the RFP and getting it out there. So you've got time to do it. Just make sure that you're giving them enough time to respond. When it comes to reviewing proposals, we strongly recommend that it's reviewed by a committee and uses a clear evaluation or scoring rubric, and that it is consistent with how you said you were going to review the RFPs how you're going to review the proposals in your RFP. And again, make sure you're meeting any local processes that you have to go through. When it comes to selecting a consultant, consider their track record. You know, contact their references. Check for successful completion of projects. We at SHPO cannot recommend any particular consultants, but we can tell you whether they have a history of submitting projects that have been considered acceptable to our office. So if you're looking at several of them and you've got questions, you can give us a call and we can tell you our experiences with them. Can they do what you need? But can they also do what you want? You know, so again, that goes back to your what things do you need in the project and what things would be nice. And make sure they meet the Secretary of Interior professional qualification standards in the appropriate field. There's a link there that will take you to a list of consultants on our website that we update on a regular basis. And those are the folks where we have looked at their resumes and said, yes, they meet the SOI standards in archaeology or in history or historic preservation or any number of other fields. So make sure that you, for example, if you're doing an archaeological survey, it's not considered appropriate to hire an architectural historian to do it because they don't have the experience in archaeology. And likewise, if you're doing design guidelines, well, an archaeologist doesn't have that background. So make sure you're selecting consultants in the appropriate field. As you're going through the project, just keep in mind some of the project monitoring requirements. We like to have regular check-ins with our office to make sure that things are going on schedule. We have formal reports that are due back to SHPO in September and January that I will send out. And this is something that is relatively new, but we want folks to be aware of. For National Register nominations, we expect a substantial draft of at least Section 8 of the nomination, which is the history and context section, back to us by the end of January so that we can provide it to the State Review Board at their March meeting for them to provide initial comment back, because they're ultimately the ones that have to sign off on that, on National Register nominations. So as long as we've got a substantial draft of Section 8 back at the end of January, we can proceed on that timeline. And we ask for periodic drafts of other publications just so we can stay on top of things. Finally, here's the FY19 grant cycle. Again, all of this information is available or will be available on the CLG website. And if you've got questions, please give me a call. Remember, since we are now operating on the extended 2-year cycle, we can no longer grant extensions on CLG grants. So by the time we get to September 2020, we have to be done with things. All right? Questions? I know I covered a lot of material very quickly, but hopefully this has helped folks get an idea of, you know, the process and the grants. But I'm happy to take and answer any questions that folks have. Yep. Yep. Well, I mean, yes, you could hire 2 consultants to do it, but you know, if you're applying to us, say for $10,000 to do it, we can't give you $10,000 for each consultant. Well, you can apply for that, but I can't guarantee that you would get $10,000 for each. Absolutely, absolutely. That happens all the time. Yep. Any other questions? Oh. Sounds like maybe not. Like I said earlier, if you think of any questions later, please feel free to give me a call. My number and my email are available here on the last slide. Yep. Do we have someone ask a question? No. Okay. And I'm happy to answer anything I can. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining the webinar today. And like I said, we will try and get this up on the CLG section of the SHPO website pretty quick here. And I look forward to seeing all of your projects for the coming year. So thanks a lot.